Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be continuing the reassembly and rebuild of the engine on the Wheelhorse Raider 9. We cleaned up all of these engine parts at the end of last video, and what we're hoping to do is get as far as possible as we can with reassembling and rebuilding the engine, which we need to put the new valves in and do all of that stuff. However, what we're going to do first is reassemble the ignition system, because once we've got that on we can then put the flywheel back on, and then it'll be 10 times easier to turn over the engine. The first thing we're going to fit is the stator, and the bolts for some of these things that we took off we've put in bags corresponding to like the area where they go. So these two here are for the stator, then these two here are for the ignition module, which will be the thing to go on next after this. So I'm just going to gently push this off and try and line up the bolt holes. Next thing to go on is this backing plate, which we did spot some damage on the sheath of this, of these two wires, so we've just taped that up, and we've made sure all of the wires are out of the way so they don't get pinched or anything by this plate when we put it on. I'm just going to try and line this up the best I can. Done. We are now ready to put the flywheel back on, which hopefully after this engine rebuild we won't have to take this off again, since this was quite difficult to actually get off the 2 times that we've had it off. Next thing to be reinstalled will be the ignition module, which goes up here, and you can see there's a slot on this hole here, which is for the adjustment that you do once you've got this here, to these pins. There's the short pin and then the long pin, and the adjustment that needs to be set to is there needs to be a gap between the bottom of the ignition module and a long pin that is between 6 and 10 thousandths of an inch, which we'll do this off camera because we'll need one person holding the ignition module, one person putting in the fixings, and then we'll need to get the adjustment right. So we'll come back to you once we've done this. We've fitted up and adjusted the ignition now, and we're onto the starter motor, which is held on by 3 bolts, one at the top here, and then 2 at the bottom. The next job is the valves, and we've got 2 new valves here. The old ones were in alright condition, and the seats were a bit pitted, but they were still okay. But the reason why we're changing them is because the old inlet valve the gap on it was 24 thousandths of an inch down there, when it should have been 10 thousandths, which these valves on this engine are not adjustable. The only way you can adjust the gap is by cutting a bit off the end of the valve to create more gap, or making the seat deeper to close the gap. And we didn't feel like taking more than 10 thousandths of an inch off of the seat, so we went for new valves. So what we're going to do is we're going to be seating them, and then we'll adjust them to the length that they need to be to meet the gaps that we found in the manual. But that could take a bit of time, so we'll do that off camera, and we'll get back to you once we've fully adjusted them. A long time later now, and we've finally done the valves. Took us quite a long time, but we're happy with the valve gaps now. So we've done a couple of things after that, which we ran a tap through each of the head bolt threads, and they are clean, as you can see now. No more mark or anything in there. And because the head was warped, we skimmed the head. To do this, we got some fine grit paper. We put it on our surface plate, and then making sure that we kept this flat as we were doing it, we've made this all the same height as the low spot, which was there. You can kind of still see where it's slightly pitted and stuff, but it's a lot better now. Something that's confused us about this though is in our gasket kit we've got two head gaskets, which they're made out of different materials. This one's metal and this one is something else, but since we're more used to working with this kind of material, we're going to go with this one to use. So now it's time to put on the head gasket and bolt the head back on. We have jumped ahead a bit here, but we forgot that the tin work had to go on at the same time as the head because they're attached to the head bolts. Now we're reusing the old head bolts, but we've got new washers on them. You may remember we used our bit of cardboard to mark out where each head bolt went. But before we use a torque wrench to torque them up, I'm just going to nip them up with the ratchet quickly. You may notice we've made a bit of a change on here, and we've put all new head bolts on here now, and we have a reason for that, and that is because well, multiple reasons actually. Some of the head bolts, when we tried to put a socket on them, like this one, were so rounded it couldn't even grip it, which is unhelpful and meant we couldn't do it up. And two of the head bolts are meant to be 2 inches long, like this, and the rest are meant to be 2 1/4. It's these two that are 2 inches long. However, we had some that were the right size, like those, but then we had ones like this middle one, which were just a random size in between, which was unhelpful as well. So we put all the right size bolts in and torqued them up. At first we did them to 50-inch pounds, and then went up in 50-inch pound increments as per the manual tells you to, up to 200-inch pounds. With the head bolts on, the next thing to go on is the carburetor. We've got the gasket on there, and it is time to fit this up. So first I'm going to try and put this onto the governor like that. Then this just goes on here, and I will get the cameraman to hold the carburetor while I put the nuts on, and then that'll be another thing on. We have the carburetor back on now, and whilst we've been doing some of this work, we've had a bit of a conversation on where we'd like to go next, and instead of just going straight to build up the rest of the tractor, what we're going to do is put together everything that we need to try out the engine and try that out first, because then we can be confident that the engine works and build up everything else, rather than having everything built up and the engine has a problem with it and we have to strip it down again. This does mean that we'll have to take it apart after we've tested the engine, because we want to change some things like rewiring, all of the wiring, and the throttle and choke cables, which we want to change. But that shouldn't be too much difficulty. I think we'd prefer to make sure that the engine is running, so we'll just do a quick walkthrough of things we need to do before we get to that point. Now we need to put the fuel tank on and run the fuel line through here, connect it up to the carburetor or to the fuel pump, because the fuel source is quite handy in a combustion engine. And then we need to have the throttle and choke cables. The choke cable will be clamped on here and go to here on the carburetor, and the throttle cable runs under the engine, gets clamped there, and then goes onto the governor here. Now then we'll need to connect up the two stator wires, the cable to the starter motor. The battery cables will need to be connected up to a battery, and before I forget, we will need to put on also this ignition wire, which I will do quickly now. So let's get on with the first job on that list, which is the fuel tank. And because we're not going to be driving anywhere, this is just going in temporarily, we'll ignore the clip for the moment. Put that in there. And now to put it through the engine cover, and we'll do the screwdriver trick that I said about when we first put this back on. Put some fuel hose onto the screwdriver and push it through on the fuel hose end, and use the screwdriver to guide it through the whole this side. There we go. And then once I put the clip back on, that can go onto the fuel pump. Now onto the throttle and choke cables, which is the choke one here. We find it easiest to actually put it onto the place where the cable needs to fix onto, and then put it under the cover, and then make sure that's in the position we want it in, and then tighten up the screw on there, because it just saves a lot more fiddling about with the end once you've tightened up the clamp. And we're going to be doing this for the choke cable up here, and the exact same thing on the throttle cable down there. We have hit a bit of a snag, which is why we wanted to change the choke and throttle cables, is the choke is seized solid. So that's helpful. So we disconnected it, and if we need to use the choke to get it started, then we'll just operate it by hand. Now we've connected up everything else, so the engine is ready to start. However, we've taken quite a long time getting this ready today, so you'll have to wait until the next video to see it starting. I know, cliffhanger. But on that bombshell, it is time to end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.